Good evening, everyone. Looks like we are live. The little tick is counting down and is bright red, so I'm assuming it's live, which is great. So welcome, everybody. I'll let it go for sort of 30 seconds or so people could sort of catch up and join in, but it certainly looks like there's a fair few people here, which is great. What's it now? We'll give it another sort of 30 seconds just to let sort of people catch up, but and then we can sort of get going, really. I'm trying to we did one of these last week, which was a great success in that there were quite a few people on there, and we had lots of questions, which is great, but it was about an hour long, which I think is probably a little bit too long personally. So, I mean, I don't mind. I could talk about photography all day long, but not everybody else has that amount of time available. So my plan is to try and sort of whip through it a little bit more this evening, and try and get it to around about half an hour if I can, but we'll see. But obviously, if there's plenty of questions and people are happy to stay, then I'm more than happy to answer the questions. And once we're finished, obviously, you can put questions in the comments, which should be great. And I'm just switching them on now so I can see them. And I can answer those later on as well. And obviously, you can message me and drop me emails and stuff. So that'll be good. So evening, everybody. Hi, Steve. Hi, Alan. Hi, Janet. Hi, Philippa. Hi, David. Hi, Mark. There's a few people coming on, so that's really exciting. Actually, I'm quite enjoying these things now. And you may have noticed it's a slightly different scene this time. So I've moved my whole office around so that I can be sat in front of the window, which is better light. I should have known better as a photographer. And my Mac is firmly planted on a desk, so it's not moving around. Which in the past it was sort of sat on my lap, which is not ideal. Mr. Eldridge, good evening. So this will, and actually Richard, who's just joined, is one of my members, made the comment that it made him feel a bit seasick with the Mac moving up and down. So hopefully we've addressed that. Hello, Helen, welcome. So let's get started then. So the first part of this, now let me get to, I'm gonna leave the comments up actually. So it's just a little bit about me really. So obviously some of these people here this evening, a fair few of these names I recognize. So welcome. And for those I don't, welcome as well. I'm Carl Thomas. I'm the owner and founder of Beyond the Lens Academy, but also a professional photographer in my own right, running a business called Carl Thomas Photography that specializes in dogs. You may have seen my doggy pictures on my Facebook page or Instagram or in the press or wherever. So that's kind of what I do. And what led up to Beyond the Lens Academy, and I'll just spend 5 minutes, if that's okay with everybody, just touching on what that is all about and how it came about. So in the 5 years, just over by about a month now, I've been running a dog photography business. I've obviously been through a journey, as anybody will have done if they're a pro. And I've been on various workshops. I've been on various webinars. I've bought training classes. I've done online stuff. I've done pretty much everything that's out there. And some of it's good, some of it's average, some of it was awful. And so what I've wanted to try and create, and I've been thinking about this for some time, and now we're live, which is great, is a platform whereby people can join, and it's interactive. It has obviously good value in terms of learning content, but it's a place where you can start as a beginner, if you've just been and bought your first camera, and stay with it and grow all the way up to becoming a professional and making a living from it, if that's something you want to do. But if you're an amateur, you can join as an amateur and look at wildlife photography or landscape photography, or whatever it might be. So I wanted to create a platform, and some of the things that are in the platform, let me just go to my little banners just to remind me. There are 3 levels, beginner, amateur, and pro/aspiring pro. And each of those levels have different levels of content. And as you can expect, the more you go up the level, in terms of the memberships, there's more content and more specific content. Each of the areas has content tailored to each individual, well, not each individual, or it does in the pro level, but more about the skill level they're at. So every level has a direct message facility, kind of makes sense, but actually being able to get hold of me, having watched a video or watch one of these, this is a free webinar on the public group, but if being able to contact me directly on a regular basis is certainly something that's there for everybody. There is a private Facebook group, which is proving very popular and getting very busy now, and it's one of the things I found useful when I've been in these sort of groups is the ability to, I guess, privately share information and pictures and settings and ask for advice and get feedback. So that has been a great value to me, and certainly from what I can see in our little group, it's something that our members are really enjoying. So online learning modules, that kind of sort of goes without saying, but they are not your standard online learning modules. So they are interactive in that they are created with the members that we've got in the academy already. So we've got one going on. In fact, later on this evening, I'm jumping onto one for beginners, which is about the basics of photography. So rather than me just create and record a series of what would effectively be fairly bland videos with me chatting, they will be videos with me talking about the different aspects, and there will be members partaking in the video and asking questions, and I can answer those questions during the course of the video. So it's more like a lecture, really, where people can see the questions asked and the feedback that's given. And then when those videos are then posted in the membership platform for people to watch them later, or members as they join down the line, there's also a place to comment outside of the comments that are in the video, if that makes sense. So to further sort of enhance the feedback and learning. So yeah, we're quite excited about that. We've got a mobile app, which we're rolling out. In fact, I think we're rolling out on Monday. So people who are members can access all their content in their libraries and videos while they're on the go on their mobile app, which is kind of a given these days, but it's taken a while to get done. This is something I've been working on today. We've got it, and it's just a case of integrating it. But effectively, if you imagine a half an hour sort of training video that you may have watched, there'll be something in there that resonates with you that you think, oh, that's quite good. You may have written it down, but you may want to go back and find it. And so all our video content will have keyword searchable aspects to it. So you'll be able to go to a video like this one, for example, and search the bit where I was talking about searchable video content, for example, and it takes you straight to that point. There'll also be a fully printable and downloadable transcript of each of the videos. So for those that like printed paper and be able to highlight things on, also for those of hard hearing, and we've got some members who have hearing difficulties, so that's a great benefit for them. And just next thing, weekly group webinars. So we have interactive sessions, so effectively, and there's different amounts at different levels. So we'll be getting together as a group, talking about different subjects, whether it's a training thing or whether it's a comment that somebody's made or some specific area, new technology, types of settings and so on. So that kind of self-explanatory. New gear reviews. I'm planning to do quite a lot of this because the world of the world of photography and technology is a fast-moving thing. So things are changing all the time. There's a lot of people asking about mirrorless cameras versus DSLRs and iPhones versus full-frame cameras and so on. So we'll be spending quite a bit of time doing things like that. What else we got here? Let's have a look. Oh, we've got group image critiques. This is very valuable because it allows people to submit a number of images as a group of, say, 5 or 10 people or more, and we can then get together and have a chat about the good, bad, and the indifferent. And that allows people to get good feedback and start to understand how their creativity could maybe be improved. But it also allows people to get some positive feedback, because one of the things about photography is quite a lonely thing. You can spend a lot of time out and about on your own, and you're not getting feedback or positive praise or constructive criticism about your images. It can be quite disheartening sometimes. There are one-to-one image critiques, so same thing, but literally me and one of the photographers. That's usually at the pro level, and also sometimes in the amateur level, where they are trying to perfect, say, shooting dogs running at 25 miles an hour, and they'll go and take a load of images, and we'll sit down and go through them and talk about what could be improved and where the issues may be, and so on. Then we'll have things that are driven by our members, because at the end of the day, this is about the members, not about what I think we need to learn. So this will allow people to come on and say, do you know what, I really would love to spend a little bit of time talking about, I have to think of an example, social media for photographers, for example. So for professionals, in fact, I was touching that with one of my professional members earlier on this week. Social media is such a complicated area, very powerful if you get it right, and can be very painful if you get it wrong. So that's an example of what we may be doing there. And then finally, before I get into some more exciting stuff, which is images and sort of chit chat and settings and so on, I do run very regularly, although of late not so regularly with the lockdown, photography workshops, and all our members get the ability to have invites to those before the dates go live to the wider public, and they are discounted. So that's kind of a broad brushstroke, pretty quick whip through what Beyond the Lens Academy is all about. I mean, just for an example, some of the things we've been doing this week and that I've been talking to members about and helping them with, social media, I talked about that, and that's very popular with pros, obviously if they're running businesses, but also with some of the amateurs, because they may have their own Instagram page or their own Facebook page where they're posting their images, and that can often lead to bigger and greater things to sort of, it's like a way of being discovered really. So we've done a bit of that. I've spent a lot of time with various different members at different levels talking about camera settings and how to get the best out of their camera and what things aren't right and how to change them. New camera choice, that's been very popular actually. And there's been a couple of members this week where we've had relatively long discussions about, you know, the age-old question, I'd like to upgrade my camera, what should I get? And so we spent quite a bit of time talking about budget, type of photography, and then narrowing it down to the types of camera, irrespective of brand, that may be appropriate, and moving that forward, which is good. Talking about focus settings, that's very popular. Image stabilization came up this week. It's quite and I'll touch on that in when we get into look at some of these images that I want to show people and talk about and get the questions and so on. But that's quite an interesting area because a lot of cameras have it now either in the body or you can have it on the lens. And there's a lot of misconception about it, and that misconception can often lead to poor image quality, even though image stabilization is generally something you find on more expensive cameras. So we'll touch on that today. And just finally, one other client was a pro looking at their website, and I'm working with them very closely, helping them sort of develop that and make sure it's kind of at the level they want it to be, if that makes sense. So, oh, there's quite a few more people in here. Hi, Billy. How are you? Anthony. Welcome, Anthony. Yeah, excellent. So, in terms of images, so how are we doing there? That's 15 minutes. So I know I talked a bit quick, but I kind of wanted to get, it's important to let everybody know what Beyond the Lens Academy is all about. Let me just go back and get rid of that annoying banner that's there. But, you know, I don't want to spend the whole evening talking about that. I really want to spend a bit of time sharing some knowledge because that's kind of what a lot of people are here for, really. So, and it certainly was the big takeaway from last week. So let's go back to comments. So what I was going to say is anybody who wants to ask questions, they're more than welcome to. Just put them in the comments and then I'll start coming back to those in a minute. But in terms of images, so let's have a little look at some images I've got for you this week. Now, where have I put them all? They're in here. No, they're not. They're in there. Right, bear with me. So, right, here's an image. So here's a gannet. I'm trying to think where this was. It was up in Scotland. You may have seen this image on my Facebook page, actually. I posted it the other week. And you can see that in the bokeh, blurred out part of the image, there's a whole load of them sat there. And that required, it was a really windy day. It was up in Scotland, north of, along from Elgin. I can't think of the name of the place, but it doesn't really matter. But it's quite a popular capture. People seem to like this image. And, you know, so what was special about it? Well, I was at the top of a mountain, well, the edge of a cliff, I suppose, on the seaside, and lying down. I wasn't using a tripod. I'm not really a fan of using tripods. As you can see, this is an action shot, so with quite a bit of detail I've managed to capture there. And I did make a note of settings because it's something that people ask me a lot about, and I'm quite comfortable sharing it. Not every photographer's keen to do that, but I certainly don't have a problem telling people how I took the image. So that would have been with my camera, which is a 1DX Mark II, but you'd have been able to get this image with a very basic camera as well, because it's more about being in the right place to get that image in the first place, if that makes sense. So that was taken with a 300mm f2.8 lens. Now that is, in fairness, a great lens, not overly powerful. 300mm, not a massive telephoto zoom, but it's a very good quality lens, and it's one that I can't remember if I borrowed it from Alan Ward, who I was with, who's a very good friend of mine, a wildlife photographer, or whether I hired it. I certainly don't own it, because it's about £6 lens, and I wouldn't use it enough to warrant it. So that was the lens, shot at f2.8 and at 2.5 thousandths of a second shutter speed, so a very fast shutter speed. And the reason for that being probably faster than you might think you would need is I wasn't on a tripod and it was extremely windy. So there were points when we were taking these images where these birds, well, that bird looks like he's diving and he was moving reasonably fast. At some points, it's almost like they were just hovering, if that makes sense. So, yeah, that was one image. Let's have a look at the comments. Has anybody got any questions? Yeah, there's a few people using camera. Yeah, no questions yet. That's good. Right, well, we'll keep going. Let's get back to another image. Right, so here's the opposite. So here's something that's sat relatively still. Little red squirrel with his little ears up. Looks like he's got a few fleas on his face. So yeah, and this one was taken with, where's my squirrel? That was with a 400mm lens. Now I do remember hiring this lens, because it's about a 10 grand lens. So it's a Canon f2.8 400mm telephoto lens, amazing lens. So it allowed me to get this image without being too close, but it's still nice and sharp, which is great. But also the background, I mean, the separation distance with a lens like that the image is created is massive. So it almost looks like it's in a studio, but actually that is forest behind. So yeah, there's a kind of a very different kind of image, if that makes sense. And in terms of the settings on that one, where's our scroll? So, yeah, so that was at 2.8 and at 12/50th of a second. So not as fast, but still reasonably fast, because they're not, you know, they move around quite quickly, and obviously all their fur will be constantly sort of shimmering and moving. So I like to get these sort of images tack sharp, if that makes sense. Let's have a little look. Here we go. Here's a question from Philippa. Let's pop it up. I'm not sure if this will come up over this overlay or not. Looks like it does. That's great. So where were your focus point on the bird picture, and was it single point? And the answer to that for me is always simple, because that's all I ever use. Well, I tell a lie. 80% of the time I use single point focus, which, for those who don't know what that is, it's the focusing points in your camera in that you can see through the lens, and I use the one in the middle, basically. I sometimes move it around, but I usually use the one. On very rare occasions, sometimes, for example, birds in flight, where the background, not the one you've just seen, because the background's quite complicated, there's things there, but in the sky, where the sky is just there, you can get away with using multi-point focus or auto for the entire range. And that's where the camera decides the focus point it's going to use and tracks the subject. Where that doesn't work is typically when you're on the ground, you're looking at, like, for example, dogs, which I do a lot, when they're running around, there's going to be trees and stumps and leaves and various things that the focusing system will grab if you don't use single point. So 90%, 80% of the time I'm using single point. So I hope that helps, Philippa. Good question, though. All right, let me switch this one off. Next one we got here. What's that say? Right, here's quite a good one. Elliot, thanks for your question. I have a Canon 500D. I struggle to know what settings are best for taking pictures of birds, etc. Well, my advice there really is, depending on what lens you've got, is to have, and I guess it kind of depends on the lighting as well, but if you take a normal scenario where you're taking photos of birds that are flying around, you want, the main thing is the fast shutter speed. So, you know, I was at 2,500 of a second, but, you know, certainly over 1,000. So 1250, 1600 a second is a minimum. And one thing you can try and do, particularly if you're taking photographs, because on that Gannet, I shot at f3.5, even though the lens goes 2.8, and that allowed me just a little bit more depth of field and a little bit more latitude to make sure more of the bird's in focus, if that makes sense. So I would, with birds in flight often, because the background is so far away anyway, you can afford to be 4, 5, 6, or maybe even 7 in terms of the aperture if you've got enough light. So that's certainly something I would recommend. Elliot saying, I only have the 300mm lens. Brilliant. Great lens. All right, let's have another look at what other images I've got. Let's go back to images. And here's quite an unusual one. So some would say this is kind of, it's almost a macro shot because it's very close up and the bee is nice and sharp from what you can see in the image. And I know Facebook, where this is streaming to, the various different sites it's streaming to, kind of denigrates the image quality, but certainly on my Mac and the final version of this one, the bee is tack sharp. So the settings on it, and this will surprise people. It's not a macro lens, and I'm not as close as it looks. So the Bumblebee, Mr. B, was at f2.8, which is why not all of the petals are in focus. So just as you go to the back of that flower, you can see they're very slightly soft, which you'd expect at that narrow aperture. Where's the other settings? So 0.002 of a second. And so it's not completely frozen the bee's wings, but it's certainly frozen his body enough to make it look like a pleasant image. But I used the 400mm f2.8 lens for that. And that's a very powerful lens. So I was probably, just trying to remember the image, I was probably 10 meters away. And so that just shows you what you can achieve if you've got, you know, a very powerful lens and the right settings. So, you know, a 300mm lens on a crop sensor camera would have the same sort of effect. So it's not always about having very powerful lenses. It's just about, you know, knowing how to use the equipment. So yeah, that's quite an unusual one, that. Let's have a look at this one then. Oh, got to have a doggy. Here we go. This is Mac, all the way up in Scotland. And again, a very different kind of image to, actually quite different to a lot of the dog photography that I've done. This one was, the weather was a bit like it is now, overcast, about to rain. and we were in a forest. So I had to use a very high ISO on this one, which was, well, I say very high, it was at 2000, which for my camera was okay. It doesn't look very noisy. The shutter speed for Mac was 640 of the second. So you could go lower for, I mean, there's no such thing as a static dog, as I've said before, but I could have got away with a slightly slower shutter speed up, but he had been running around. So you can see he's got his tongue out. So he'd have been sort of shimmering and shaking. So having a decent or as fast a shutter speed I can get away with given the light would make a lot of sense, so that you're getting a nice sharp image, which you can see there. And you've got a nice little glint in his eye. And the lens I was using is my trusty 70-200 f2.8, which is what I shot at. So, and I think I was zoomed at about 140 mil, looking at my settings. So that's a very popular image, and the client loved that one. I think that's one they bought and put on their wall from memory. So let's see if there's any more questions in here. Okay, Alan, you asked what was the ISO. I'm not sure. Let's see when you put that question up. 619. Oh, that's probably this image then. And so the ISO was 2000, if that was the image you were thinking about. On the previous image, which was the Bumblebee, the ISO was 320. So I hope that helps. ISO is something to play with. I mean, I'll just spend a little bit of time on ISO. It's obviously, for those who don't know, it's the sensitivity of your sensor, and you can turn it up to make it more sensitive to light when you're in low light. Downside of it is, of course, that depending on the level of equipment you've got, the higher the ISO, the more noisy the picture will get. So you'll get sort of grain, which is distracting. It can make an image look less sharp and slightly soft. So, you know, ISO is something I play with. And what I'd recommend to anybody with whatever camera and lens combination they've got is get used to the ISO. You know, go out and take some photos in rubbish light of dark things, so that, you know, where you've got overcast lighting, like in forests and shadows and stuff, just to get an idea of how high you can push your ISO in your car. A bit like a car, you know, find out where the red line is, beyond which, you know, the engine will blow up, or in the case of an image, it'll just look too grainy and you'll end up having to delete it. So, you know, hope that helps that one. Let's see what we got here. Hello, Vincent. What software are you using for editing? I use Lightroom, which is part of the Adobe suite of products. So the two main ones that they're known for are Lightroom and Photoshop, really. There's hundreds of others for video editing and various different app type things, but they're the two main ones. And so, yeah, I use Lightroom for 99.9% of all the photos you'll have seen on my Facebook page and on my website are editing Lightroom. So don't let anybody tell you that Lightroom is basic, because it does everything I need. And certainly, you know, Photoshop is a little bit more powerful, it can do a bit more. But for the kind of photography I do, and for the majority of people, Lightroom is more than adequate. So I hope that helps. Haley's got a question here. What lens would you recommend for dogs to go alongside the Nikon D750? I would recommend the 70-200. Full stop. My favorite lens on the planet. It's a great range. The Canon and Nikon versions of it at the sort of higher end, f2.8, fantastic optics, really, really fast, what they call USM motors in them, so ultrasonic motors. So they're quiet, but really quick and very snappy focus. So one of the lenses I would not be without. Here we go. Here's a good question from Billy over in Isla. Is it Isla? Can't remember. He'll tell us in a minute, but anyway, I know he works in one of the whiskey distilleries, or did, because he gave us a tour around, which is wonderful. So I have a black and a yellow lab. What one? I thought it was saying there. What one do you use single point on? Given the choice, well, that's a good question actually. So what's driving that question, for those that aren't sure where Billy's going with that, is the focusing system on a camera. Pretty much every camera out there likes to see contrast. So if you get your camera out and point it at a magnolia wall, you'll find your lens hunting. It's very difficult for it to grab any focus, because there's no detail and no different colors. As soon as it comes across an edge or a picture frame or something that's on your wall, it'll grab focus. So when you're pointing at, like this dog picture, if you're pointing at Mac here, the camera's going to struggle a little bit. So fortunately, in this scenario, he poked his tongue out, so the focus grabbed that quite nicely. And there was a little bit of an eye catchlight in his eye, so that helped. The same is true of yellow labs, because of course they're all one color. But I think given the choice, I would, if they were both sat next to each other, obviously in the same sort of distance from the camera, I'd probably focus on. I try both, but I should imagine the the Yellow Lab would probably help your camera a little bit better, if that makes sense. The other thing you can do, of course, is if it's struggling on both, is pre-focus. So find something on the ground. That's where they are. Point your single point at that, near their foot if there's a bit of a leaf there or some grass, something with contrast. Take your finger off the back button if you're using back button focus, which we touched on last week, and then recompose. And that definitely works. Let's have another question here. Good question. I get asked this a lot. Hello, Steve. Do you always shoot in manual? No, is the answer. I will shoot in manual for certain types of photography. So when I'm doing the sort of long exposure sunsets and landscape photography where you are playing with all the different settings and each one is equally important, then yes, I would probably use manual. But for the majority of my dog photography, I shoot in shutter priority because shutter speed is always important to me. It's the main thing I have to get right. And so secondary to that is the aperture. And the way I deal with it is I don't use auto ISO because it goes all over the place. And that came up in our Facebook group this week as to why people don't use that. And so I use ISO manually, if that makes sense. So I set the ISO, the shutter speed, I'll choose the shutter speed I want, and I'll just keep my eye on where the aperture is. And if the aperture is getting too high, as in, the numbers going up, then and I want it lower, then I'll just move around with the ISO to get that. And if I run out of space on the ISO, say I'm down at 100, then I'll increase the shutter speed to get the aperture down. The reason I do that is because it means that I'm in the best position for when I go from an action shot to a portrait shot to any kind of shot, because I can use the same structure without having to sort of mess around. Oh yeah, see, Billy's just said he's still making whiskey. It's wonderful. So right, let's have another look at an image. What else have we got? Let's have a little look. Where's it gone? Bear with me. All right, let me just give that question. Right, hang on. That's gone. So another image we got here is this one. I can't remember if we shared this last week. We might have talked about it. It's an often discussed image. So I thought I'd put it up. So this was up in Scotland. A very good friend of mine, Alan Ward. He's I think I mentioned him quite a bit, but he's a great photographer, and he loves salmon fishing and very, very involved. It's his sort of life. And so we were setting up to take this photo, and this is where you would use manual, actually. Well, kind of manual. So you need a tripod. And so the settings, what was I doing on this one? This salmon, where is it? So that was my 70-200 lens, favorite lens, f7.1. And the reason for the wide aperture there, so the depth of field is quite deep, is you're guessing where this salmon's going to jump up. So to increase your chances of getting a tack sharp image, which this one is, you have to give yourself a bit of latitude. So I gave myself probably a couple of foot of depth of field, the amount in focus, so that I could grab the image when the thing jumps. And you've got no idea when they are going to jump. They don't give any warning. You can't see them because it's white water, effectively. So the other parts of the setting were set the camera at 80mm, so it gives me a relatively wide. So this is slightly cropped in in the editing process. But by using 80mm, there's enough space to, if he jumps in one corner or the bottom corner, the top right, I've got a chance of grabbing the salmon, which I can crop and position later. And at 2,500 of a second, because they jump really quick, and obviously you've got a waterfall of water coming down at God knows what speed there. So that's kind of how I dealt with the settings on that one, and that took some doing. And so the structure in terms of how I did it. So I got down close to the edge of the waterfall. I used a very, very sturdy tripod. Can't remember the make of my tripod, actually. I'll look it up if anyone wants to know. Camera set on there, all set up properly with a remote shutter release. And then I focused manually. I switched off focusing. So I left it on manual. So I'm using the lens as opposed to anything in the camera. And I sort of moved it to where I thought some was roughly in the middle of the waterfall. So I've got an idea, hoping the salmon was going to jump up in the middle. Set the shutter speed where I wanted, check the aperture where I wanted, check metering. So I moved the ISO around to get what I thought was going to be the right exposure. Slightly overexposing. So when you look at it on the back of the camera, it looks slightly bright, but that means that when you edit it, you can see all the lovely details in there in terms of the scales and the lovely lateral line or dorsal line, whatever they call it on the salmon. So that was the settings. A remote release, little cable release, and you sit there and you wait. And I can't remember how long we were there, but it was certainly more than an hour. It might have even been 2 hours. And what much is a lovely shot. which I'm obviously very proud of, there are hundreds of shots with no salmon in. So it's exactly the same frame as that, but just water, or maybe a tail, or a salmon disappearing into the water. So, you know, that's kind of how we did that one. Quite a complicated little setup, but good fun, and obviously very rewarding when you get the shot that you want. So keep the questions coming if anyone's got any more. I'm conscious that we're already at half an hour, so I'm just scanning through them now. Let's see what we've got here. No, I don't think we did that one. We did that one. Somebody saying knowing how to use your camera equipment is really important. Sandra's asked a question that was at 6:15, so I'm not sure. Yeah, so it would have been, Sandra, the question you're probably asking, given that we were probably talking about the dog then, would have been, I'd have been shutter priority. So I hope that helps. If it's not, just clarify the question in terms of the image you were looking at. Hey, Martin. Hey, Jane. Then I can answer that question for you. I'm just scanning through them because there's quite a few here. Yeah, that's great. That's what's on there. No, okay. Oh, Anthony Bowman's and Isla. What a wonderful place. Very lucky. Excellent. Yeah, good questions. Right, let me just yeah, brilliant. Sandra's great. Sandra, glad I answered that for you. So anybody got any questions? Make the most of it, because this is you know, I'm gonna do these relatively regularly. We'll be putting announcements out to when they are. But you know, it's free. Have a chat. Ask any questions you want to do. I will go back to these images and see what else we had. There was one from last week that somebody was asking me about. Oh yeah, this one. So I know I showed this one last week, and you can see the bottom of me because it's not quite cropped properly. This again is one where you'd use a tripod and you'd be in manual mode. So you get your focus how you want it manually using the lens. And I think looking at this image, I would probably focus on those rocks in the top right-hand corner. And then I used a an ND filter. So effectively a dark piece of glass that's screwed on the end of the camera. And what that does is make it look very, very dark. And so in order to get the exposure, because this was during the day, so I think it was what they call a 10 stopper. So it drops it down 10 stops of light. So it does make it really quite dark. But the point of that is then I could use a long exposure, and I think this is probably 3 or 4 seconds from memory. I don't have it written down here, I'm afraid. But at 3 or 4 seconds, which gets enough light into the camera via the lens and onto the sensor, but in a slow enough, so to expose the rocks and all the solid images, but slowly enough so that the water is blurred, but not too blurred. Because if it's too blurred, it looks a bit odd. So you can see a little bit of sort of direction and lines in amongst that. So hello, Matthew, welcome. So that was quite good fun, again with a tripod. And it's not the sort of photography I do regularly, but it's quite challenging and really good fun. And you know, I'd encourage anybody to get, you know, some filters and just play with it. The other thing you can use for these, let's see if I don't think I've got this image in here, which would be a shame actually, because yeah, here we go. So this one was in Isla, and I think I talked about this last week actually. Same sort of structure, everything manual, except that instead of on the previous one where I'm picking a shutter speed of 2 or 3 seconds, on this one I was using what they used to call bulb mode. In fact, they still do on most cameras, which is where when you either use a remote shutter release or you're pressing the shutter, you press it and you hold it down and the shutter stays open until you let go. So you can go, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, let go and count as long as you want. Or you can get these ones that have got timers on. Again, manual focus, and this had a graduated filter and a stopper. So it's 2 filters, one in front of the other. So the first filter is even across the entire frame, and that then makes the light, the image dark enough so that I can have a long enough exposure to get the rocks clear, because when you're looking through the camera, they can't see a thing, it's black. But allowing the sea to look all nice and washy and soft, but not overexposing the sun. And then, because the top half of the image is, as you can imagine, when you're looking at this, was very bright, use what's called a graduated filter, which is basically half of the filter is clear, and then it gradually goes from clear to dark, a bit like the old tinted glass at the top of your windscreen on the older cars used to be. In fact, some of the mod ones have it. So that was quite good fun, and again, not difficult to do. You know, these filters, you can spend a lot on them, especially the expensive Lee ones, but you know, you can get a nice little filter set, and it's quite good fun to experiment. And I'd recommend anybody doing it, because what is useful with it is it will, it gets you to sort of think about your photography. You have to think about settings. So you have to find things in your camera. And as a result of having to find things, then you'll learn more. So let's have a look at some more of the questions. Let's have a look. Right. I have a question about cameras, and if I could be a bit cheeky, I was wondering if you'd be able to help. Of course, Dan, stick your question in. I'll do my best. Can't guarantee I'll know the answer, but I'll certainly try. So pop it in the comments, and then we'll come back to that in a second. Sandra is one of my members. She's got a question. I use a standard 18-300 lens only. Is this adequate as a starting point for an all-round lens? Yes, any lens is a good starting point. And one of my favorite quotes, as I think I've used a lot, is the best camera is the one you got with you, and you learn with it. It's for an all-round lens. It depends what you mean by all-round. If you want sort of general walking around, people, not necessarily landscape, but people, portraiture, just general around about photography, then I'd probably have a slightly faster lens, so maybe a 24-70, which I know is in that zoom range, but I know that lens, one of the drawbacks of that lens, in terms of the fact that it's got a great zoom range, which is brilliant, but it's not particularly fast as a result, so you compromise on the amount of light it lets in. So I think when it's zoomed in, it's probably goes down as dark as f5 or f5.6, or maybe even 6.3. So as long as you've got good light, it's great. But certainly I would, I'd for an all-round, just generally carrying around lens, I'd have a sort of a 16-35 or a 24-70, or even what they call the nifty 50s, and they're not expensive. The 50mm lens, depending on whether it's a full frame or crop sensor camera, is broadly what we see, how we look at life through our own eyes. All right, we've got another question here. Martin, your images are very sharp, thank you. Do you use micro adjustment or outside labs to calibrate your cameras, lenses, or do you optimize sharpness in post-processing? That's a really good question, Martin. In fact, this comes up a lot. So for those of you who don't know what that is, so in some cameras, you can in mine, you can micro adjust the focus settings or the focusing accuracies, like calibrating it. So what you're effectively doing there is taking a photograph of if you imagine a tape measure or a ruler at an angle with some numbers on it, you take a photograph on the middle line with your single point on a tripod, very, very still, and then you look at the image and you see where the focus is. So if it's focusing bang on, happy days, you don't have to do anything with it. But sometimes you get what they call front focus or forward focusing cameras. So they might be slightly out of adjustment, so that when you focus on a fence post, for example, and you've got it absolutely bang on because the robin sat on there, it might be focusing in front slightly, or it might be focusing behind slightly. So the way you get around that, if that is a problem, and sometimes with older lenses that have been dropped a bit, you can have it. I mean, you can occasionally find this problem with brand new lenses. I have had it in the past. So the way you get around is you can, in some cameras, you have the ability to make those micro adjustments and do that yourself, or you can take your lenses off. Now, I'm a Canon shooter, and I'm what they call a Canon Professional Services member, which anybody can join. Nikon have got something similar, I think. So I can take my camera and lenses off to one of their labs, and they put it up on some test equipment, and they'll calibrate the lens and they'll calibrate the camera to the lens. And I have had that done, actually, but I've never, just to see if it made any difference. And with my 1DX Mark II, when I first got it a few years back, I had that done to the 70-200, and I didn't really notice a difference in the image quality. But I do know some people, and I have seen the pain and that can be caused with a lens that is not calibrated properly, or is basically kind of faulty, out of kilter. So sometimes people have come to me and said, "Oh, my images are soft," and actually it's because the lens is not focusing properly. It's not. I wouldn't say it's common, but it's certainly something worth checking. And so, yeah, I will always play with sharpness a little bit in post processing, but not much, because one of the issues with that is it will effectively add. The more you do in post processing, it has this ability to add noise to an image. So it's something I try and avoid if I can, but I always do a little bit depending on the image. Right. Okay. Let's have a look. So Dan's come back with this question. I currently use a Canon SureShot SX530. I think that's a little compact camera. I bought it to get into photography and learn, but was wondering what camera you may suggest to move up to or go on to after that. that's a really good question, Dan. And what I'll do is I suggest you drop me a message on the Facebook page directly, and we can have a longer chat about it, because there's so many ways of getting to the bottom of that. But certainly it's more about asking yourself some questions. So first thing to consider is your budget. You know, whether you've got £300, £500, several £1,000s. So that's an important driver. And you don't need to spend a fortune, but certainly for me to be able to help you, I'll have to have some kind of understanding of where you are at budget terms. And then the second thing is what kind of photography you want to do. So are you interested in all-round general photography? Are you specifically into landscape photography, macro photography, action photography, wildlife? And all those kind of things make a difference in terms of the way I would point you. So I won't sort of say, get this camera here, because I'm not a fan of doing it that way, because there are so many options out there. So, but by all means, drop me a message on the Facebook group. You should be able to message me there, and I'll get back to you and we can have a little chat. Because I would quite enjoy helping people with that, because it's a minefield. You click on Wex, because we can't really go in the shops anymore, and type in camera, DSLR, there's hundreds. Type in mirrorless, there's hundreds. Bridge, there's hundreds. So it's definitely I feel your pain. So I'm certainly more than happy to help you on that one. Haley's got another question here. What's she saying? Sorry to ask her. Don't worry, Haley, that's fine. But where do you focus on moving dogs? Question. Knowing you will achieve focus, as I don't always get it right. Okay, that's a good point. So I don't always get it right. I've got a Canon 1DX Mark II, which is considered to be Canon's flagship camera, and a Canon 7200 Mark III, which is their latest lens. So it's in the Canon world of DSLRs, Nikon have got exactly the same gear. Their fastest, most appropriate lens, and the fastest camera with the best focusing systems in the world. So when dogs are running at you, I might take a series of 30 shots. You know, half of them will be where I want, half of them won't. So that's one of the things I always, especially when I do workshops and I'm helping people in the academy now, is that, you know, photography, when it comes to action, you will never get every single image sharp. It's just the way it is. And so you have to understand that and accept that. And that helps people's confidence quite a bit. And then with single point, that's just what I do. And so you're right. Sometimes you won't have the point on the dog. Sometimes you miss it and you'll get the grass behind it. If it's a little terrier and the area the dog's running around is fairly bland, then you could probably use some more of the focus points, maybe the little group of 6. Well, I think it's 9 actually, the next group up, because there's no chance that it's likely to try and grab a fence post or a leaf. But I very rarely use that. I normally just stick on single point. And then what you have to do is practice. So get used to, it's a bit like a golf swing. I'm not really a golfer, but you know, I've managed to perfect a very smooth way of moving my lens and the way I sit. So make sure you're comfortable when you're going to take the shot, get yourself all set up, and then you can sort of pan around slowly and sensibly and smoothly. So all those things contribute to getting a sharp shot. So I hope that helps. Let's have a little look. There's another question here. Same question actually, on the same point of dogs and focusing. Do you use single point or multi-point? No, I think we've just sort of covered that, Matthew, but good question. Somebody's phoning me. He's phoning me this time. So yeah, single point focus for me. It makes it harder, but when it is, so the thing there is, of course, when it is in focus, you've got what you want. Rather than if you use a multi-point, you're likely to get more dogs, more frames that are focused, but you're going to get the ear in focus, or the tail, or the paw when he's stretched out in front. So, you know, you'll get more sharp ones, but they still won't be ones you want to use, if that makes sense. So let's have a little look. So I think, here we are, it's me saying I want to try and keep it half an hour, and we're at 45 minutes already. So I'm just conscious of people's time, but you know, if there's any more questions, I'm more than happy to ask them. You know, in terms of this Beyond the Lens Academy, it's certainly getting very busy now, and the members we've got in, because we launched the platform a couple of 3 weeks ago now, and I think it's 24th of May. We had founder member launch, which is over 3 or 4 days, and those people are all in there now, and we're all working together on the content, and I've had one-to-one meetings with every single person, which has been really enlightening. Well, not everybody, some are still to come, which is great. We're opening the doors again on the 1st of July, and so there will be some offers. There won't be anything like the founding member offers, but there certainly will be some offers and structures to induce people to come and join us at beginner, amateur or pro level. So yes, and then all I'll sort of say in conclusion, really just thanks for your time. I'll try and keep it off now, but you know, people asking questions, so people must be enjoying it. And looking at the number of little eyes I can see on this, that it's the same, pretty much the same as it was after 10 minutes. So people are obviously enjoying the questions, so that's good. So I'll sort of look to wrap it up now, unless anybody's got any more questions. So I'll put a little page up at the end here and leave it up for a few minutes. But the so somebody's put on here. So final question: could you put on Facebook page some references to Lens, please? Yeah, I'm happy to do that, Sandra. In fact, we'll have a little chat about it directly because you're one of our members anyway, so we can have a one-to-one chat about that if you like. Because it's, you know, getting that right is important. And they do say when it comes to budget, if you've got an X amount to spend, then spend more of it on the lens than the camera, because a really good lens on an average camera works really well, but a really, really rubbishy lens on a really good camera doesn't work so well. So, you know, that's quite good. Yeah, thanks, Billy. Great to see you on here, obviously. But yeah, I'm hoping to get over there again fairly soon. So yeah, what I was going to say was we are open again in July. Make sure you register yourself on the website, which I'll put. Let me put it up now. See, we're doing it, forgetting it. Right, let's have a look. I think it's this one. Yes. So I'll leave this up for a minute, just so you've got it, you've got time to note it. And what I'll do is I'll put the, let me put a comment in, if I'm allowed to on here. Yeah, looks like I am. www.beyond. Hope I'm telling this right. Beyond. Okay, so that should appear to everybody shortly. Beyond the Lens Academy. So that's the website. But basically, if you go on there, whilst you can't join at the moment, what you can do is join our Facebook page, which most people are probably already on actually. But register yourself on the mailing list database. And I think I said last week, well, I know I said, is I don't spam people and send you loads of emails. But what I do is let people know when we're doing these webinars, and also as we get closer to the opening date, which is, you know, a couple 3 weeks away now, if probably slightly less than that, then we'll be talking about some of the webinars that are specifically about what's in the Academy, how the structures work, and so on. So if something like the Academy interests you, make sure you're on the database. I promise not to send you loads of emails, but I will make sure you're kept up to date. Because there were, when we opened the doors for the founding member launch, we opened it for, I think it was 4 days, and there were a number of people who missed out. Not because they didn't really know about it, but they just were busy or hadn't got the reminders. So make sure you're on that. So it doesn't look like there's any more questions from anybody, but thanks everybody saying thank you, which is great. Yeah, no, I really enjoy doing this. I'll do another one soon, but what I'll do is rather than work out a date now, because I almost had to move this one to an earlier in the day, so I'll work out a time that makes sense, and I will put a note out on the Facebook page, obviously, and also via the mailing list, so make sure you're on it, because that way you'll find out when the next one of these is. Have a great evening, everybody, and get your camera out and have a play. And for those that I'm going to drop me a message, please do, and I'll get back to you. And also, if you've got any more questions once we finish this, pop it in the comments and I'll have a little look later on and go through it with you all. Okay, thanks a lot for your time. Goodbye.